Recently, I've made a video about the problems Zerg are facing in the current StarCraft 2 meta, and today I want to talk about Protoss, why this race has been the biggest problem in StarCraft 2's 15-year history, and how Protoss somehow manages to be both the hardest race and the easiest race to play at the same time. Let's start from the beginning. In terms of game design, Protoss were always envisioned as a high-tech faction that relies on expensive units and heavy micro. That's the concept Blizzard followed when they created the race for Wings of Liberty. And at first, that's exactly how it played out. In most matchups, Protoss gameplay boiled down to defending until their first key units arrived, usually Colossi or High Templars with Sonic Storms that could wipe out armies with splash damage. But if the player wanted to be more aggressive, the race allowed them to go for timing attacks, especially with the active use of sentries and force fields. The most famous example of this style was Parting's Soul Train in ZVP, which is a sentry mortal push. Even if you just look at the units, it's obvious that many of Protoss' key units revolve around active abilities. Take the Stalker. Without Blink, it's hard to even imagine the unit, and that one ability often decides the outcome of battles. And that's what Protoss' design was built around: powerful but extremely expensive units. Naturally, that brought a number of big gameplay problems. The first and most obvious problem is Protoss Powerspikes. Terran and Zerg grow stronger in a kinda steady, linear way. Their armies scale up as they mass more units and their economy grows, they add upgrades, and so on. You could draw their power curve as a smooth line going upward. Protoss, on the other hand, would look like a staircase. Huge jumps in strength at specific moments. Those jumps, their power spikes, often decide the game. A very common scenario both in the early days and the modern meta is whether Zerg or Terran can actually break Protoss before the next terrifying tech unit comes to the battlefield. A few seconds before Colossi spawn could be the difference between victory and defeat. High Templars without Storm are practically useless, but 1 second later when it's resurged, they can annihilate an entire army, and that's a very deceptive weakness.
I'm too weak.
Sometimes those power spikes can happen right on the battlefield. Even though StarCraft 2 is a game with almost no randomness, Protoss has one of the most unreliable units in the entire game, and that's Disruptor. A single well-placed shot can vaporize half your army in a second, but at the pro level, even 4 disruptors can all miss and just be out-microed, and suddenly your ultimate weapon turns into dead weight that costs you the game. Even without abilities, the arrival of certain Protoss units can drastically swing battles. But at the same time, most of those units are fragile and easy to lose. Take the Colossus. It's very easy to target it down with Marauders or even with a pack of Marines. In many ways, Protoss has always been a gambler's race. The core issue is that Protoss lacks reliable, efficient mid units, strong tier 1 or tier 2 units that they can fall back on. Terran Bio is solid on its own and throughout the whole game. Zerg can mix units such as Banelings, Lynx, Hydras in countless ways. And Protoss doesn't really have that. Blinkstalkers partly fill that role, but they fall off badly as supply counts rise, and they require constant micro even against basic units, unlike the other races. Zealots are quite good, but they also have limited potential, and there was actually a time when they were mass-produced with the extra charge damage, but that was also nerfed. So almost every Protoss composition depends on at least one expensive splash unit that often decides the game. The only real exception is Skytos, which is dangerous and annoying in its own way. This really leads to unfortunate situations that frustrate everyone. You've probably noticed that Protoss is the most hated race in the StarCraft 2 community, often seen as OP and lacking real skill. Yet Protoss players rarely win tournaments, and even in Grandmaster League they lose quite a lot. Why is that? It mostly comes down to their dependence on expensive units. Playing Protoss is a stressful experience, and maybe that's why so many Protoss players turn salty and start cannon rushing. Because just a handful of units are so critical, Protoss suffers some of the harshest punishments for mistakes in this entire game. If you let your Templars, Disruptors or Colossi get sniped, the game can end instantly no matter how well you performed before. And if you split your army badly and miss the timing for spellcasters, it's also over. And of course the ultimate nightmare. A zealot wanders out of your wall, a pack of zerglings floods in, and suddenly your entire base is gone. And that's why playing Protoss can make you neurotic. they're constantly terrified of missing a timing or taking a wrong step. This usually leads to two playstyles. Either you turtle up until 200 supply, or you go out for a timing attack with the hope of ending the game in one big swing. And speaking of 200 supply, that brings another problem. Because balance has always been built around Protoss having the most expensive units, 200 supply of Protoss often equals or even beats 200 supply of every other race. And here I'm talking about levels below Grandmaster League. For Zerg to beat a maxed out Protoss army, you often need 1.5 armies. The first one dies and the second one comes in as reinforcements and finish the job. On top of that, you need to attack from multiple angles and ideally on creep, all of which takes a ton of preparations. But if you just do a straight up A move into A move, Protoss always wins, and usually by a huge margin. And that's what created the meme that Protoss race is actually easy and even monkeys can play them. But that's not true. The race itself forces players into a very specific playstyle, because any step outside of it gets punished brutally. For years, the devs tried to fix this with patches and some units like Mothership Core and batteries, and to some extent it worked. In the modern meta, Protoss have become more flexible in their unit choices and playstyles. But the 200 supply problem still hasn't really been solved, and we can see that the late game now is slightly stronger for Protoss race. And the same goes for a lot of cheesy strategies like cannon rushes, because only Protoss can consistently beat all three races with one single build order and sit comfortably in Grandmaster League. This all ties into a much bigger, long-standing issue with asymmetric balance. StarCraft 2 just can't seem to find the golden middle ground. On the one hand, the game has to be fun and fair at all levels, from casuals to pro players. From that perspective, Protoss really feels like the easiest and most convenient race, most of the time. But on the other hand, balance has to be shaped around players who can squeeze at least 80% of their race's potential, otherwise the pro scene turns into chaos if we start nerfing everything that Gold League players complain about. The just get better, play like Mario or Cyril argument sounds kinda logical at first, but the problem is this mindset doesn't really apply to everyone. A lot of players just want to enjoy the game and feel fairness at their level, not grind to Grandmaster just to finally experience balanced matchups. And that's the most frustrating part, because the fact that your favorite pro gamer wins tournaments doesn't really mean that you should have to put in 10% more effort just to beat someone of your own skill level. Technically, the races can be perfectly balanced, but not the effort that each player puts into this game. Another huge issue is Protoss' insane reliance on timings. This connects to what I mentioned earlier, but here is the irony. Protoss are considered the most micro-intensive race, but that's not quite true most of the time. Many of their units simply don't have much micro potential, especially in the mid and late game. Blink Stalkers and War Prism tricks start falling off by the 8 or maybe 9 minute mark, and even micro with Immortals or Archons has limited impact. What's left is basically throwing down storms and other spells in one big fight. So Protoss Micro really only shines in mid-game timing attacks, which is another reason why Protoss players lean towards cheesing. Other races, especially Terran, just have way more options. A good marine drop with the right micro can kill a huge amount of your opponent's economy or tech, but the same 8 zealots? Well, not really if your opponent reacts appropriately. Their potential is capped from the start, relying on the opponent having no defenses or reacting too slowly, not on how well you can micro or fight, and that's a big difference from Terran race. And that's why as a Zerg player I genuinely feel sorry for Protoss, because on the one hand the race can feel easy, winning games with an A move and a big late game death ball, but people don't see the suffering behind that, the exact timings, the constant map control, the razor sharp build execution Protoss players go through. It's like an iceberg, everyone sees the OP part most of the time, but underneath lies a massive amount of pain from the dumbest, most heartbreaking losses imaginable. And what's the solution? Honestly, I don't really know, because nobody has managed to fix this core problem yet. But I'm looking forward to a new patch that might change the current things and maybe bring something new to the Tier 2 or Tier 1 Protoss gameplay. That's all from me. Thank you for watching and check out my review of Stormgate. Good luck and see you next time.